A poor black maid married an old millionaire. But on their wedding night, she locked the door. Everyone thought the marriage was already strange. But what happens next will leave you speechless. Because behind that locked door is a secret no one saw coming: her young son. And when the boy whispers, "Mommy says you're my daddy," the old man's world shatters. Whispers of greed, betrayal, and forbidden love explode across the town. His family is furious. The community is scandalized. And the maid's quiet life is thrown into chaos as the truth comes crashing out. But one question remains: is this shocking marriage the beginning of a family's redemption, or the spark that destroys them all? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The silver teaspoon gleamed in Clarissa's weathered hands as she gave it one final polish. Thunder rumbled outside the mansion's tall windows, and rain pelted against the glass like tiny drums. Her arms ached from hours of cleaning the Whitmore family. Silverware, each piece telling its own story of wealth and tradition that felt so far removed from her simple life. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 8, its deep chimes echoing through the empty rooms. Lightning flashed, illuminating the dark wood paneling and crystal chandeliers that Clarissa had dusted countless times over her years of service. She carefully arranged the last piece in the velvet-lined drawer, her reflection catching in the polished surface. Lines of exhaustion etched around her eyes, silver threads weaving through her dark hair. "Time for Mr. Whitmore's evening tea," she murmured to herself, finding comfort in the familiar routine. In the kitchen, she prepared his favorite Earl Grey, arranging shortbread cookies on a delicate china plate, just the way he liked them. The storm grew fiercer as she carried the silver tray up the curved staircase to his study. She found him exactly where she expected, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his tall frame silhouetted against the stormy sky. Lightning illuminated his face for a brief moment, revealing deep creases of worry that hadn't been there when she'd first started working for him. "Your tea, Mr. Whitmore," Clarissa announced softly. Setting the tray on his mahogany desk. He turned slowly, and something in his expression made her pause. "Thank you, Clarissa. Would you mind staying a moment?" The request surprised her. In all these years, he'd never asked her to linger. "Of course, sir," she replied, her hands clasped formally in front of her apron. "This house," he began, gesturing to the vast space around them. "It's too big for just one person, don't you think?" His voice carried a weight she'd never heard before. "It is a large home." "Sir," she agreed carefully, watching as he moved to sit in his leather armchair. "Do you know, Clarissa, I haven't heard from Edward in 6 months." He picked up the teacup but didn't drink. "My own son, too busy with his law practice to spare even a phone call for his father." Bitterness crept into his voice. "And Victoria, well, she made it clear at Christmas that her life in Europe is far more important than visiting her aging father." Clarissa's heart ached for him. She'd witnessed the growing distance between Mr. Whitmore and his children over the years, seen how each missed holiday and forgotten birthday had carved deeper lines in his face. "The worst part of getting older," he continued, staring into his tea, "isn't the aches and pains. It's the loneliness. The way the world seems to shrink, day by day, until all you have left are empty rooms and memories." Thunder crashed outside, making the windows rattle. Clarissa took a step closer, moved by the raw pain in his voice. "Sir, I'm sure your children, my children have their own lives," he cut in sharply, then softly. "I'm sorry, Clarissa. You've been here longer than anyone. You've seen it all, haven't you? The arguments, the disappointments, the slow unraveling of what I thought was a close-knit family." She remembered those painful scenes. Edward storming out after a heated argument about the family business. Victoria announcing her permanent move to Paris with barely a backward glance. Through it all, she'd maintained her professional distance, though her heart had ached for the family she'd served for so long. "You know," Mr. Whitmore said, setting down his untouched tea. "You're the only constant presence in my life these days. The only person who still treats me like a human being, not just an obligation or an inconvenience." Clarissa felt her cheeks warm at his words. "I'm just doing my job, sir." "No," he said, rising suddenly from his chair. "No, you do far more than that. You notice when I'm not feeling well. You remember how I take my tea, He paused, running a hand through his silver hair. "You care." The storm seemed to hold its breath as he took a step toward her. Clarissa's heart began to pound, something in his manner setting off warning bells in her mind. "Clarissa," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've been thinking about this for a long time. About loneliness, about companionship, about what truly matters at this stage of life." She stood frozen as he took another step closer. Lightning flashed again, throwing his face into sharp relief. She could see uncertainty there. And something else, hope. "I know this may seem sudden, perhaps even inappropriate, but," he took a deep breath, "would you consider marriage to me?" The words hung in the air between them like suspended raindrops. Clarissa's mind reeled, her thoughts scattering like leaves in a storm. Marriage? To Mr. Whitmore? The very idea seemed impossible, like something from a dream or a nightmare. She thought of the gossip it would cause, the shock on Edward's face, the sneers from the country club set. But beneath those fears, something else stirred, a longing for companionship she'd buried deep years ago, a desire for respect and security she'd never dared to voice. Her hands trembled as she looked at the man before her, seeing not just her employer but a fellow soul touched by loneliness. The storm raged outside, matching the tumult in her heart. Fear whispered warnings about crossing social boundaries, about the risks of such a drastic change. Her dignity, carefully maintained through years of service, urged her to maintain professional distance. Yet something deeper, perhaps fate itself, seemed to be at work in this moment. Another flash of lightning illuminated the room, and Clarissa's fingers tightened around the teacup she'd unconsciously picked up. Her voice, when it came, was barely audible above the storm's fury. "Yes," she whispered, the single word carrying the weight of years of loneliness, hope, and unexpected possibility. News spread through the small southern town like wildfire on that humid morning. The whispers started at May's diner, where the breakfast crowd huddled over their coffee cups, sharing shocked glances and hushed conversations. "Did you hear? Old man Whitmore's gone and lost his mind," someone muttered. "Marrying his colored maid, of all things." The gossip rippled outward, gaining momentum with each retelling. By mid-morning, the story had reached every corner of town. Ladies at the grocery store clucked their tongues disapprovingly. Men at the barber shop shook their heads in disbelief. Cruel words and racial slurs floated through the air like poison. Edward Whitmore, the eldest son, stormed into his father's study that afternoon, face red with anger. "Father, you cannot be serious about this farce. Think about our family name, our reputation." But the elder Whitmore remained unmoved. "I've made my decision, Edward. The wedding will be held at First Baptist next week. Simple, dignified, and yes, legal." Despite the protests of both his children and their attempts to stop the ceremony, Whitmore moved forward with determination. He personally visited Pastor Thomas Reynolds, who received the news with visible discomfort, but couldn't find biblical grounds to refuse. On the wedding day, Clarissa stood in the church's small side room, smoothing down her simple white dress with trembling hands. She'd chosen something modest, a knee-length dress with lace sleeves, borrowed pearls at her throat. Her heart thundered in her chest as she heard the murmurs of the sparse crowd gathering in the sanctuary. When the organ music began, Clarissa took a deep breath and stepped into the aisle. She walked alone, no family to give her away, just her own dignity carrying her forward. The few guests present watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Edward Whitmore sat in the front pew, his face a mask of cold fury. Pastor Reynolds stood at the altar, nervously adjusting his collar. His voice wavered slightly as he began the ceremony, but grew stronger as he continued. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Throughout the service, sharp looks were exchanged among the guests. Someone coughed pointedly during the "speak now or forever hold your peace" portion. But no one dared to object openly. The pastor hesitated briefly before the final pronouncement, his eyes darting between the couple. But seeing Whitmore's stern determination and Clarissa's quiet grace, he completed the vows with renewed conviction. Back at the mansion, a modest reception was set up in the grand dining room. White roses and silver candlesticks adorned the tables, elegant but understated. The few guests who attended moved about awkwardly, maintaining polite distances from the newlyweds. In the center of it all, Whitmore took Clarissa's hand in his, holding it high as they faced their first moments as husband and wife. His grip was firm, his stance proud and defiant, as if daring anyone in the room, or the world beyond, to challenge their union. The reception's final guests had departed, leaving only echoes of forced pleasantries and judgment in their wake. Night settled over the mansion like a heavy blanket as Clarissa helped Mr. Whitmore up the grand staircase, her arm linked through his for support. Each step felt like climbing a mountain, her heart pounding so hard she feared he might hear it. The wooden stairs creaked beneath their feet as they ascended. Clarissa's hand trembled on the polished banister, her wedding ring catching the dim light from the wall sconces. Mr. Whitmore patted her hand gently, mistaking her anxiety for wedding night nerves. "My dear," he said softly, "there's no need to be frightened, but there was every need." The secret she'd kept hidden in the servants' quarters weighed on her conscience like lead. When they reached the landing, Clarissa's eyes darted toward the master bedroom, their bedroom now, and then briefly toward the back stairs that led to the servants' area. At the bedroom door, Clarissa suddenly pulled away. I need a moment," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Before Mr. Whitmore could respond, she slipped inside and locked the door with a decisive click. "Clarissa?" Mr. Whitmore's confused voice came through the wood, followed by a gentle knock. "Is everything all right?" "Please," she called back, her voice trembling. "I just need some time." "I'm sorry, I just need a little time." She heard his sigh, heavy with hurt and puzzlement. "Of course, my dear. Take all the time you need." As soon as his footsteps began moving away, Clarissa gathered her skirts and hurried to the servants' stairs. She descended quickly, her wedding shoes clicking softly against the worn steps. At the bottom, she pushed open the hidden door that led to the cramped quarters where Isaiah had been living in secret. Her 8-year-old son was, already in his nightclothes, sitting cross-legged on his small cot. His eyes lit up when she entered, but he remembered to stay quiet as she'd taught him. "Mama," he whispered, reaching for her. "You look like an angel in your white dress." Clarissa's heart clenched as she sat beside him, smoothing his curly hair. "Time for sleep, baby," she murmured, trying to keep the worry from her voice. She tucked the thin blanket around him, her wedding dress crinkling as she bent to kiss his forehead. Isaiah's eyes were already heavy with sleep, but he fought to keep them open. "Will I meet Mr. Whitmore tomorrow?" he asked hopefully. Clarissa soothed, her hand trembling as she stroked his cheek. "We'll talk about it in the morning." In the distance, she could hear Mr. Whitmore's footsteps retreating down the hallway above, each step an echo of her guilt. Isaiah turned restlessly in his bed, and Clarissa sat in the darkness, trapped between her new life above stairs and the precious secret she kept below. Late that night, the mansion's hallways were dim and quiet, filled only with the soft whispers of settling wood and distant thunder. Little Isaiah couldn't sleep, his mind racing with thoughts of the strange sounds and unfamiliar creaks in this big house. He slipped out of bed, his small feet padding softly against the wooden floor as he made his way to the hallway, rubbing his sleepy eyes with tiny fists. The corridor seemed endless in the darkness, with only faint moonlight filtering through the tall windows. Isaiah's cotton pajamas rustled as he walked, his favorite teddy bear clutched tightly against his chest. The unfamiliar shadows made him nervous, but his curiosity pushed him forward. Suddenly, he heard footsteps approaching. Before he could retreat, Mr. Whitmore appeared around the corner, holding a glass of water. The older man stopped, surprised to see a small child in his hallway. Instead of anger or alarm, his face softened with gentle concern. "Well, hello there, young man," Whitmore said quietly, bending down to meet Isaiah's eye level. His knees creaked slightly as he lowered himself, but his kind smile never wavered. "Are you lost?" Isaiah looked up at him with innocent, trusting eyes. Without a moment's hesitation or understanding of the weight his words would carry, he whispered, "Mommy says you're my daddy." The glass of water slipped from Whitmore's hand, hitting the carpet with a soft thud. His body went rigid, face frozen in shock as the words echoed in his mind. Time seemed to stand still in that moment, the distant rumble of thunder underlining the gravity of this revelation. The sound of rushing footsteps broke the silence. Clarissa appeared in her nightgown, her face etched with horror as she took in the scene before her. Her worst fear had come to life in this darkened hallway. "Isaiah!" she gasped, reaching for her son with trembling hands, but it was too late. The secret she'd guarded so carefully had spilled from innocent lips, changing everything in an instant. Whitmore slowly stood up, his movements stiff and mechanical. His eyes, wide with disbelief and growing understanding, fixed on Clarissa's face. "Is it true?" he demanded, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of years of unspoken truths. Thunder rolled again, closer now, as if nature itself was holding its breath for her answer. "Clarissa, is he mine?" Clarissa stood there, one hand protectively on Isaiah's shoulder, the other pressed against her heart as if to keep it from breaking. The thunder rumbled once more in the distance, filling the silence with its ominous voice as Whitmore waited, trembling, for the truth that would change all their lives forever. The study was dim, lit only by a single brass lamp that cast long shadows across the room. Clarissa sat rigid in the leather armchair across from Whitmore, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. On the nearby couch, Isaiah slept peacefully, his small chest rising and falling with each breath, unaware of the heavy conversation about to unfold. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Clarissa finally broke the tense silence. "Mr. Whitmore," she began, then corrected herself. "James, there's something I need to tell you about Isaiah." Her voice trembled slightly as she fought to maintain her composure. Whitmore leaned forward in his chair, his eyes fixed on her face. The revelation from earlier still echoed in his mind, the boy's innocent words in the hallway that had shaken his world. "It was 8 years ago," Clarissa continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Before you married Margaret. I was new here, just started working as a maid." She paused, gathering her courage. "That night during the spring storm, when the power went out," recognition flickered across Whitmore's face as the memory surfaced. "The night Yes," Clarissa nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "We shared something tender, something beautiful. But it was forbidden. When I discovered I was pregnant, I was terrified. I knew I'd lose my job, be cast out, shamed. So I left for a while, told everyone I was caring for my sick aunt." Whitmore's hands gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles white. "Isaiah, he's my son?" The words came out rough, filled with wonder and disbelief. "Yes," Clarissa whispered. "I've carried this secret for so long, protecting him the only way I knew how." Whitmore stood slowly, moving to the couch where Isaiah slept. The boy's face was peaceful, innocent. Now that he knew, Whitmore could see traces of himself in the child's features, the shape of his nose, the curve of his jaw. "All these years," he said softly, shaking his head. "All these years, I had a son and never knew." His voice cracked with emotion. "Why didn't you tell me?" You were married to Margaret by then, Clarissa explained, wiping away tears. I couldn't destroy your marriage, your reputation. And I was afraid. Whitmore sank to his knees beside the couch, studying Isaiah's sleeping face. The initial shock was giving way to something else, a profound sense of wonder mixed with crushing guilt. He thought of all the birthdays he'd missed, all the moments he should have been there for. He's such a good boy, Clarissa said softly. Smart kind, always wanting to help others. He has your heart, even though he never knew you. Whitmore reached out with a trembling hand, gently placing it on Isaiah's shoulder. His touch was tentative at first, then filled with a father's instinctive tenderness. My boy, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. My boy. Golden rays of morning sunlight streamed through the mansion's windows, casting warm patterns across the polished floors. In the kitchen, Clarissa moved with practiced grace, the familiar rhythm of preparing breakfast now holding new meaning. The sizzle of bacon and the rich aroma of coffee filled the air as she worked, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Isaiah could barely contain himself, practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. Is Daddy coming down soon? He asked for the third time, his small fingers drumming against the kitchen counter. His eyes kept darting to the doorway, eager for any sign of Whitmore. Patience. Baby, Clarissa said softly, though she couldn't help but smile at his enthusiasm. The word Daddy still felt strange, yet wonderful on her son's lips. Heavy footsteps on the stairs announced Whitmore's arrival. Isaiah's face lit up as the older man entered the kitchen, dressed in his usual impeccable suit. Good morning, Whitmore said, his voice warm as he took in the domestic scene before him. Daddy! Isaiah rushed forward, then stopped short, suddenly shy. Can you teach me to wear a tie like yours? Whitmore's eyes softened. Come here, son. He beckoned Isaiah closer, removing his own navy silk tie. Kneeling down to Isaiah's level, he draped the tie around the boy's neck. First, the wide end goes over the small end. Like this, Clarissa watched them from the stove, her heart swelling as Whitmore patiently guided Isaiah's small fingers through each step. The boy's tongue poked out in concentration as he attempted to copy the movements. After breakfast, Whitmore led them to the grand piano in the parlor. The instrument had sat untouched for years, its gleaming surface collecting dust. Now he lifted the cover with reverence, revealing the pristine ivory keys beneath. Would you like to learn? He asked Isaiah, who nodded eagerly. Whitmore sat at the bench, patting the space beside him. His fingers found the keys, and a halting melody filled the room, simple but sweet, like a memory coming back to life. Isaiah watched in wonder, his small hands hovering over the keys. Can I try? Of course. Whitmore guided Isaiah's fingers to press one key, then another, creating a simple tune. The notes rang out clear and true, filling the once silent mansion with music. Clarissa leaned against the doorframe, watching father and son at the piano. Tears pricked at her eyes as she observed their matching expressions of concentration. The mansion, which had for so long felt like a museum of memories, now hummed with life and possibility. Back at the breakfast table, Isaiah reached for the orange juice pitcher, his enthusiasm causing it to tip. Oh! He exclaimed as the liquid splashed across the white tablecloth. Instead of the tense silence that would have once followed such an accident, Whitmore surprised them all by chuckling. Well, I never liked this tablecloth anyway, he said. Dabbing at the spill with his napkin, Isaiah giggled, relieved he wasn't in trouble. Clarissa joined in, the shared laughter warming the morning air. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the spilled juice and turning it to liquid gold. In that moment, the three of them connected by simple joy. The mansion felt more like home than it ever had before. That afternoon, Clarissa drove the old station wagon into town, her shopping list clutched tightly in her hand. The familiar streets of their small southern town suddenly felt different, hostile even. As she pushed her cart through Miller's grocery, the whispers followed her like shadows. Can you believe the nerve? One woman hissed to another, not bothering to lower her voice. Marrying the richest man in town. She must have trapped him somehow, came the reply. These people always find a way. Clarissa kept her head high, though each word stung like a physical blow. She focused on selecting fresh vegetables, pretending not to notice how other shoppers pulled their carts away from hers, as if poverty or manipulation might be catching dot at church that Sunday. The atmosphere grew even more toxic. The usual warm greetings turned cold. Ladies who had once praised her cooking at church potlucks now huddled in corners, their whispers spreading like wildfire through the congregation. The maid trapped him, someone said loud enough for her to hear. Probably been planning it for years. The final blow came when Edward Whitmore Jr. and his sister Margaret stormed into their father's study one evening. Clarissa could hear their raised voices from the kitchen, where she was helping Isaiah with his homework. "Have you lost your mind, Father?" Edward's voice boomed. "Marrying the help? And now we find out there's a child?" "My personal life is not up for discussion," Whitmore replied firmly. "We'll cut ties," Margaret threatened, her voice sharp with anger. "You'll never see your grandchildren again. Then that will be your choice to live with," Whitmore responded, though his voice carried a hint of pain. Later that night, Clarissa heard him pacing in his study, his footsteps heavy with worry. The doubt seemed to seep under the door like a fog, filling the entire house with unease. In her bedroom, Clarissa sank to her knees beside her bed, tears falling freely now. "Dear Lord," she whispered, her hands clasped tightly together, "please give me strength. Show me the way forward. Help me protect my family." Her tears fell onto her folded hands as she continued to pray, seeking comfort in her faith as the weight of judgment pressed down upon her shoulders. The Sunday morning sunlight streamed through Isaiah's bedroom window as Clarissa buttoned up his crisp white shirt. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she managed a warm smile for her son. "You look so handsome, baby," she said, smoothing down his collar. Isaiah wiggled impatiently as she tied his small bow tie. "Mama, will people be mean to us again at church?" Isaiah's innocent question made her heart ache. "We're going to hold our heads high," Clarissa answered softly. "Remember what we talked about. God loves us no matter what others say." Down the hall, Whitmore stood before his mirror, methodically preparing himself. He adjusted his dark suit with precise movements, his jaw set with determination. The previous week's whispers and stares had only strengthened his resolve. As they gathered in the foyer, Whitmore reached for Clarissa's hand. "We'll enter together," he said firmly. As a family, the short drive to church felt endless. When they arrived, Whitmore helped Isaiah from the car, then offered his arm to Clarissa. They walked up the church steps together, their footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. As they entered the sanctuary, a wave of gasps rippled through the congregation. Mrs. Thompson dropped her hymnal. Several people turned away, while others stared openly. Isaiah gripped his mother's hand tighter. Pastor Reynolds stumbled slightly over the opening prayer, his eyes darting nervously between his congregation and the unlikely family sitting in the third pew. Halfway through the service, during a moment of quiet reflection, Whitmore suddenly rose to his feet. "Pastor Reynolds," his voice rang out clear and strong. "I have something to say." The congregation stirred, and Clarissa's heart pounded. Whitmore turned to face the shocked faces around them. "This woman beside me is my wife," he declared. "And this boy is my son, my flesh and blood. We stand before God without shame." Pastor Reynolds, though clearly caught off guard, found his voice. Then may God bless this family," he said, raising his hands. "May he protect and guide them." Isaiah's face broke into a radiant smile as he reached up to hold Whitmore's hand. Around them, the congregation exchanged stunned looks, some disapproving, others thoughtful. But Whitmore stood tall, his grip firm on his son's small hand, while Clarissa sat with quiet dignity beside them. The heavy oak doors of Whitmore's study creaked open as his lawyer, Edward Thompson entered with a leather briefcase. Clarissa was dusting the hallway furniture when she heard their muffled voices through the door. Her hand paused on the polished wood as fragments of conversation drifted out. Need to make changes. Secure their future. Whitmore's voice carried a note of determination. Are you certain about this, Mr. Whitmore? The lawyer's tone held concern. Such drastic alterations to your will. Clarissa's heart skipped a beat. Though she hadn't meant to eavesdrop, she couldn't help but listen as papers rustled inside. Through the crack beneath the door, she could see their shadows moving. Absolutely certain, Whitmore declared firmly. Clarissa and Isaiah are my family now. I want the majority of my estate to go to them. The scratch of a pen on paper filled the silence. Suddenly, angry voices erupted from the foyer. The study door burst open as Whitmore's 3 adult children stormed in. Elizabeth, Richard, and Margaret, their faces twisted with fury. How dare you? Elizabeth shrieked, her designer handbag swinging wildly. That woman has bewitched you. Richard jabbed an accusing finger at Clarissa. We knew she was after your money all along. Nothing but a gold digger. Clarissa stepped into the study, her chin held high despite her trembling hands. That's not true. I love your father, and he loves Isaiah and me. Margaret lunged forward, her manicured nails nearly scratching Clarissa's face before Richard held her back. You scheming witch. You trapped him with that bastard child. That's enough. Whitmore thundered, rising from his desk. I won't have you speaking about my wife and son that way. Son? Elizabeth laughed bitterly. She probably planned this for years, hiding that boy until she could spring her trap. Clarissa stood her ground, though her voice shook. Isaiah is your father's child. I never asked for any of this wealth. All I wanted was for my son to know his father. Liar! Richard moved menacingly toward her, but Clarissa didn't flinch. I've made my decision, Whitmore declared, his face reddening with anger. The will stands as written. Clarissa and Isaiah will inherit the majority of my estate. You can't do this to us. Margaret wailed. We're your real children. And you've shown your true colors today, Whitmore shot back, his voice rising. Then suddenly, he gasped, clutching his chest. His face turned ashen as he stumbled backward. John? Clarissa rushed forward as Whitmore's knees buckled. Rage drained from his children's faces as their father collapsed to the floor, one hand gripping his shirt while the other clawed at the air. His breath came in desperate, ragged gasps. The piercing wail of sirens cut through the peaceful afternoon as paramedics rushed into the mansion. Clarissa held Isaiah's trembling hand as they climbed into the ambulance behind Whitmore's stretcher. The boy's eyes were wide with fear, his small fingers clutching his mother's sleeve. Daddy? Isaiah whimpered as the ambulance doors slammed shut. Is Daddy going to be okay? Clarissa pulled him close, her own heart racing. We need to pray, baby. God will watch over him. But her voice shook as she watched the paramedics work frantically over Whitmore's still form, attaching monitors and inserting IVs. At the hospital, everything became a blur of white corridors and urgent voices. Doctors in crisp white coats rushed. Whitmore through double doors marked emergency. Clarissa and Isaiah were directed to a waiting room, where they huddled together on uncomfortable plastic chairs. It wasn't long before Whitmore's adult children arrived, their faces twisted with anger. Edward Jr., his oldest son, pointed an accusing finger at Clarissa. This is your fault, he shouted. You pushed in too far with your greedy schemes. You gold-digging witch. His daughter Sarah joined in, her mascara running with angry tears. You're killing our father for his money. Isaiah began to sob, burying his face in Clarissa's side. Stop yelling at my mommy, he cried out. Your mommy is nothing but a con artist, Edward Jr. spat, and that old fool fell for it. Clarissa stood up, shielding Isaiah with her body. Your father is fighting for his life, she said firmly, though her voice quavered. This isn't the time for hatred. Security had to be called when Edward Jr. tried to physically prevent Clarissa from staying. But she remained, holding Isaiah close as he eventually cried himself to sleep in her arms. The night stretched endlessly before her as she kept her vigil. In the quiet hours after midnight, Clarissa slipped down to the hospital chapel. Kneeling in the dim light, she clasped her hands together. "Lord," she whispered, "please don't take him from us. Not now, when we've just become a family. Give me strength to face whatever comes, but please, please spare him." The sun was just beginning to peek through the windows when a doctor in surgical scrubs approached Clarissa. His face was drawn with exhaustion, and her heart sank at his grim expression. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly, glancing at the sleeping Isaiah. "Your husband is alive, but I'm afraid he's in a coma. We've done everything we can, but now we just have to wait and see if he wakes up." Clarissa felt her legs go weak, and she had to grip the chair to stay standing. "But he will wake up, won't he?" she pleaded. The doctor's silence spoke volumes. "We'll continue to monitor him closely," was all he said before walking away, leaving Clarissa to face an uncertain future with both hope and fear wrestling in her heart. Days melted together in the sterile hospital room, marked only by the steady beeping of monitors and the changing of shifts. Clarissa barely left Whitmore's side, her meals reduced to untouched sandwiches from the cafeteria. Her fingers remained intertwined with his pale, lifeless hand, searching for any sign of response. "You need to eat something, Mommy," Isaiah would say, pushing a juice box toward her with worried eyes. Late one evening, as Isaiah dozed in the visitor's chair, voices drifted in from the hallway. Clarissa recognized Edward Jr.'s sharp tone. "The marriage wasn't even legal," he was saying. "She manipulated a sick old man. We'll contest it in court. What about the boy?" Sarah's voice joined in. "We can't let her keep him. He's our father's son. We'll file for custody." Clarissa's heart clenched with fear. She looked at Isaiah's peaceful sleeping face, then at Whitmore's still form. Doubt crashed over her like a tidal wave. Had she been foolish to believe in miracles? To think they could be a real family? The next morning, Isaiah found her crying quietly by Whitmore's bedside. "Mommy, remember what you always tell me?" he said, climbing onto her lap. "God hears every prayer. You said we just have to believe." Clarissa wiped her eyes, struck by the pure faith in her son's voice. "You're right, baby. I did say that." "Then you can't stop believing," Isaiah insisted, his small hand reaching out to touch Whitmore's arm. "Daddy needs us to be strong." Looking at her son's determined face, Clarissa felt shame at her wavering faith. Here was Isaiah, teaching her the very lesson she'd taught him. As evening settled over the hospital room, Clarissa leaned close to Whitmore's bed. Her head came to rest beside his motionless hand, and her lips moved in a whispered prayer. "Lord," she breathed, her voice breaking, "help us hold on. Help us keep believing." Dawn crept through the hospital windows, painting the sterile room in soft golden hues. Clarissa had finally succumbed to exhaustion in the uncomfortable chair, her head tilted at an awkward angle. Isaiah was curled up against her side like a small, warm cat, his chest rising and falling with peaceful breaths. The morning shift nurses moved quietly past the door, respecting the rare moment of rest for the devoted family. The monitors continued their steady rhythm, a familiar background melody that had become the soundtrack to their vigil. But something changed, a subtle shift in the pattern, a slight quickening of beeps. Whitmore's fingers twitched against the crisp hospital sheets. His eyelids, which had remained stubbornly closed for so many days, began to flutter like butterfly wings testing the air. Slowly, against all odds, they opened, revealing confused but conscious eyes that blinked against the morning light. The movement woke Clarissa. She stared in disbelief, afraid to trust her tired eyes. But when Whitmore's gaze found hers, recognition clear in their depths, joy burst through her chest like sunshine through storm clouds. "Doctor!" she called out, her voice cracking with emotion. "Doctor, please come quickly." Tears streamed down her face as she gripped Whitmore's hand. His fingers, weak but determined, curled around hers. "Hello, Rissa," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse. The sound of his voice roused Isaiah, who sat up rubbing his eyes. When he saw Whitmore awake, his whole face lit up like Christmas morning. "Daddy!" he cried, scrambling onto the bed to throw his arms around Whitmore's neck. Whitmore's free hand came up slowly to rest on Isaiah's back, holding him close despite his weakness. His eyes never left Clarissa's face as the faintest smile spread across his lips. "My family," he whispered, the words full of love and certainty. The courthouse loomed before them, its stone steps seeming impossibly steep. Clarissa pushed Whitmore's wheelchair carefully, her hand steady despite her racing heart. Though still weak from his hospital stay, Whitmore sat straight-backed and dignified in his best suit, determination etched on his weathered face. Inside the courtroom, tension crackled like static electricity. Edward Whitmore Jr., along with his siblings, sat with their expensive lawyers, their faces masks of cold contempt. Clarissa helped position Whitmore's wheelchair at their table, squeezing his shoulder gently before taking her seat. "Your Honor," Edward's lawyer began, his voice dripping with rehearsed concern, "this marriage is nothing but a calculated deception. Miss Johnson, I refuse to call her Mrs. Whitmore, took advantage of an elderly man's vulnerability and loneliness." The accusations flew like poisoned arrows. They painted Clarissa as a scheming servant who had plotted for years, claiming she had manipulated their father's medications to cloud his judgment. They brought up her past, her poverty, twisting every detail of her life into something sinister. And now she claims her son is his. Edward's sister Jennifer spat. "It's preposterous." Clarissa sat silently, tears rolling down her cheeks, her fingers clasped tightly in prayer. But before her lawyer could respond, a commotion arose from beside her. Whitmore was struggling to his feet, waving away Clarissa's helping hands. "Your Honor," he called out, his voice weak but clear. "I must speak." The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Whitmore, are you sure you're able?" "More than able, Your Honor." He stood, gripping the table for support. "I've listened to my children twist the truth into something ugly. But the real ugliness is in their hearts." He turned to face the courtroom. "Clarissa Johnson is my wife. I chose her not from weakness, but from strength. She showed me more genuine care as my maid than my own children ever did as my heirs." His voice grew stronger with each word. "And Isaiah, yes, he is my son. A son I never knew I had, but who has brought more joy to my life in these few months than these greedy vultures ever did." Gasps rippled through the courtroom as Whitmore continued. "I hereby publicly renounce these people who call themselves my children. They care only for my money, not my happiness." Silence fell as the judge considered, then lifted his gavel. "Having heard all testimony, including Mr. Whitmore's clear and coherent statement, I find no grounds for annulment. The marriage stands." The gavel fell with a resounding crack, and shocked gasps echoed through the courtroom. The black iron gates of the Whitmore mansion swung open as their car pulled up the winding driveway. Through the car windows, Clarissa noticed several townsfolk gathered at the edges of the property, their expressions more curious than hostile now. The whispers that had once been sharp with judgment seemed softer, tinged with something almost like respect. As Whitmore carefully made his way up the front steps with his cane, Isaiah bounced excitedly beside him. "Can we get my bike out now, Daddy?" "You promised." "Let me rest a bit first, son," Whitmore chuckled, his voice tired but warm. "Then we'll see about those riding lessons." True to his word, later that afternoon, Whitmore stood in the sprawling back garden, one hand steadying Isaiah's shiny new bicycle while the other gripped his cane. "Keep pedaling, that's it," he encouraged as Isaiah wobbled forward. "I've got you." From her spot among the flower beds, Clarissa watched them, her hands deep in the rich soil as she planted fresh rows of marigolds. For the first time in months, her smile came easily, without the shadow of fear that had haunted her for so long. The garden was coming back to life under her care, just as their little family was blooming in its own way. "You're doing it," Whitmore called out as Isaiah managed several wobbly yards on his own. "Keep going." Over the next few weeks, the change in the town's attitude became noticeable. Mrs. Peterson from the grocery store, who had once turned away when Clarissa approached, now offered a tentative good morning. The banker tipped his hat when they passed. Even old Mr. Jenkins, who had been one of their harshest critics, stopped to admire Isaiah's improving bicycle skills through the fence. That evening, as they gathered around the dining table, the warmth of acceptance seemed to fill the room along with the aroma of Clarissa's cooking. They joined hands, Whitmore, Clarissa, and Isaiah, bowing their heads together in prayer. The simple gesture of gratitude felt deeper somehow, weighted with the knowledge of how far they'd come and the battles they'd won together. "Dear Lord," Clarissa began softly, "we thank you for your blessings." The wide front porch creaked gently as Whitmore settled into his favorite rocking chair, the wood worn smooth from years of use. The evening air hummed with the song of cicadas, nature's own symphony floating across the estate grounds. Clarissa sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on the armrest of her chair, while Isaiah played with his toy cars on the porch steps. "You know, Clarissa," Whitmore said softly, his voice carrying the warmth of contentment, "in all my years in this house, I've never known peace like this." He gazed out at the golden fields stretching before them, his face relaxed and gentle. Who would have thought that true happiness would come so unexpectedly? Isaiah's laughter rang out clear and bright as he raced his cars along the wooden steps, the sound mixing perfectly with the evening chorus of crickets and cicadas. His joy was infectious, bringing smiles to both his parents' faces. Clarissa's heart swelled as she watched her son play. She thought back to those first difficult days, the whispers, the angry stares, the courthouse battles. How far they had come from those dark times. The pain that had once seemed so sharp and present now felt distant, like shadows that couldn't touch them anymore. "God works in mysterious ways," she murmured, thinking of how their unlikely family had come together. The scandal that had once threatened to tear them apart had transformed into something beautiful, a testament to love's power to heal and redeem. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Isaiah abandoned his toys and climbed onto the porch. Without a word, he took his mother's hand in his right and his father's in his left. Together, they stood at the porch railing, watching the sun sink lower over their fields. The three of them, finally whole, redeemed, and blessed, held hands as day transformed into evening, their shadows merging into one on the weathered porch boards behind them. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.